The mahogany-paneled conference room of Sullivan and Associates felt suffocating despite its grandeur. Barbara Chen Morrison sat rigidly in the leather chair, her black dress a stark contrast to the morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle. The Pacific Northwest drizzle had finally ceased, but grey clouds still hung heavy over the city skyline. "Mrs. Morrison, I know this is difficult," Attorney James Sullivan said, his voice carefully modulated as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. The manila folder before him seemed to weigh more than it should. "Your husband was very specific about his wishes." Barbara's manicured fingers gripped the armrest. After 18 months of caring for Matthew through his battle with pancreatic cancer, watching him waste away in their Bellevue mansion, she had expected this moment to bring closure. Instead, uncertainty gnawed at her stomach like hunger. "Please, just read it," she whispered, her Taiwanese accent barely detectable after 25 years in America. Sullivan cleared his throat. "To my beloved wife Barbara, who sacrificed her career and devoted herself to my care during my final months, I leave the sum of $50,000 and our shared residence until such time as my daughter claims her inheritance." The words hit Barbara like a physical blow. Daughter? Matthew had never mentioned having children from his previous marriage to his college sweetheart Sarah, who had died in a car accident decades ago. They had discussed children early in their relationship, both agreeing they were content without them, focusing instead on building his tech consulting empire and her abandoned dreams of opening an art gallery. "There must be some mistake," Barbara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sullivan's expression remained professionally neutral. "The will continues. To my daughter Elena Morrison, born September 15, 1995, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including Morrison Tech Consulting, all investment portfolios, and real estate holdings, valued at approximately $12 million. The room spun slightly. Barbara gripped the chair harder, her knuckles white against the dark leather. "Elena? Who is Elena?" "According to the documentation your husband provided, she's his daughter from an affair he had in 1994. The mother apparently contacted him recently about the girl's existence." Sullivan shuffled through papers with clinical efficiency. "There's a letter here, addressed to you personally." Barbara's hands trembled as she accepted the sealed envelope bearing her name in Matthew's familiar handwriting. The paper felt fragile between her fingers, like butterfly wings. Around them, the city continued its daily rhythm. Traffic hummed below. Construction crews worked on nearby buildings. Life moved forward while hers seemed suspended in amber. She tore open the envelope carefully, as if rushing might make the contents worse. "My dearest Barbara, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened and I'm gone. I know this news about Eleanor will shock you, and I'm sorry you had to learn about her this way. I should have told you sooner, but I was ashamed. In 1994, during a rough patch in my first marriage, I made a terrible mistake. I had an affair with a woman named Maria Santos, who worked at the coffee shop near my first office. When Sarah and I reconciled, I ended things with Maria immediately. I never knew she was pregnant. 3 months ago, Maria contacted me. She's dying of cervical cancer and wanted Eleanor to know about her father before it's too late. Elena is 29 now, a social worker in Portland. She has no idea about the money. Maria kept my identity secret all these years. I know this seems unfair to you, and I'm sorry. You deserved better than this deception, but Elena deserves a chance at the life I never gave her. She doesn't even know I existed until now. Please find it in your heart to help her understand. You're the strongest, most compassionate person I know. Guide her if she'll let you. All my love and regret." Matthew. Barbara read the letter twice, then a third time, each pass making the reality more concrete. The husband she had nursed through chemotherapy treatments, held during his worst moments of pain, had harbored this secret throughout their entire marriage. "Mrs. Morrison?" Sullivan's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" She looked up, noting concern in his grey eyes. "This Elena. Has she been contacted? Your husband requested that we wait until after the reading to reach out to her. He wanted you to know first." Sullivan consulted his notes. "She's been informed that she needs to come to Seattle for a legal matter concerning her biological father, but she doesn't know the details yet." The weight of Matthew's deception settled over Barbara like a heavy coat. All those nights she had stayed awake, listening to his labored breathing, all the medical appointments, the careful preparation of soft foods he could digest, the endless loads of laundry from his sickness, all while he knew he was leaving everything to someone else. "When will she arrive?" Barbara asked. "She's driving up from Portland this afternoon. We've scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning." Barbara stood slowly, her legs unsteady. The Seattle skyline blurred slightly through the windows. "I need some air." "Of course, Mrs. Morrison, if you need anything." "I'll be in touch," she said, gathering her purse with mechanical precision. Outside, the fresh October air carried the scent of rain and fallen leaves. Barbara walked aimlessly through Pioneer Square, past tourists and business people, feeling disconnected from the familiar surroundings. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Jenny. How did it go? "Call me when you can." How could she explain this? Jenny had warned her about marrying a man 15 years older, about giving up her career to care for him. Barbara had dismissed those concerns as jealousy. Now, standing outside the ornate entrance to the underground tour, she wondered if Jenny had seen something she had missed. Barbara's hands shook as she unlocked the door to the Bellevue mansion that evening. The 4,500-square-foot house felt cavernous without Matthew's presence. His hospital bed had been removed from the master bedroom just last week, but the indentations in the carpet remained like ghosts of his suffering. She moved through the familiar spaces, the gourmet kitchen where she had prepared countless meals he could barely eat, the living room where they had spent quiet evenings watching old movies, his study filled with books on business strategy and leadership. Everything looked the same, but the context had shifted entirely. Barbara poured herself a glass of the Pinot Grigio Matthew had loved, then sat at the granite kitchen island, staring at the letter. The paper had developed creases from her repeated readings. Each time she hoped the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. Her phone rang. Jenny's contact photo appeared, a candid shot from last Christmas where her sister was laughing, flour dusted across her apron from baking cookies with her twin daughters. "Bar? How are you holding up?" Barbara closed her eyes. "It's complicated." "The will? Was there something unexpected?" The understatement almost made Barbara laugh, but the sound caught in her throat. "He has a daughter. Had a daughter. She's alive." Silence stretched across the connection. Barbara could hear her nieces arguing about something in the background, the normal sounds of a busy family evening. "What do you mean?" Jenny's voice had shifted to her protective older sister tone. "From an affair in 1994. She's 29, lives in Portland. He left her everything." "Everything, Bar, that's not right. You were married for 8 years. You have rights. $50,000 and the house until she claims it." Barbara took a long sip of wine, feeling its warmth do nothing to ease the cold spreading through her chest. "She doesn't even know about the money yet. You need a lawyer. A different lawyer. This Sullivan guy obviously worked for Matthew's interests, not yours." Barbara walked to the window overlooking their backyard. The garden she had carefully maintained showed signs of autumn's approach. The roses needed pruning, leaves covered the patio furniture. Soon it would all belong to a stranger. "Jenny, she didn't ask for this. She doesn't even know Matthew existed until 3 months ago. That doesn't matter. You sacrificed your career, your independence. You earned that money through 18 months of caregiving." The familiar weight of guilt settled on Barbara's shoulders. Jenny was right. She had given up her position as curator at the Seattle Art Museum to care for Matthew full-time. Her savings had dwindled to nothing while paying for experimental treatments not covered by insurance. But the money felt tainted now, earned through deception. "She's coming tomorrow," Barbara said. "To the house? To the lawyer's office. I'm supposed to meet her." "Bar, listen to me. Don't do anything until you talk to your own attorney. Matthew's guilt doesn't obligate you to anything." After hanging up, Barbara wandered into Matthew's study. His laptop remained on the mahogany desk, password protected, and holding who knew what other secrets. The built-in bookshelves displayed his collection of business biographies and leadership guides, interspersed with a few novels she had convinced him to read. On the bottom shelf she found a photo album she had never noticed before. The leather cover was worn, suggesting frequent handling. Inside, tucked between pages of their wedding photos and vacation pictures, was a manila envelope marked "Personal." Barbara's heart pounded as she opened it. Inside were 3 photographs: a young woman with long dark hair holding a coffee cup, the same woman laughing at something off-camera, and finally a sonogram image dated March 1995. The coffee shop woman, Maria, looked to be in her early 20s, with kind eyes and a bright smile. She wore a green apron with Pike Place Roasters embroidered across the chest. The sonogram showed a developing baby, tiny limbs clearly visible against the grainy background. Barbara stared at the images until they blurred. Matthew had kept these photos throughout their entire marriage, hidden but preserved. While she had been falling in love with him, planning their future together, part of his heart had been occupied by this secret family. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown Portland number. "This is Elena Santos. Mr. Sullivan gave me your contact. I'll be at his office tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'm sorry for your loss." Barbara read the message several times. Elena Santos. She had kept her mother's name. How different might things have been if Matthew had known about her from the beginning? Would he have left Sarah? Would Barbara ever have entered his life? She typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "Thank you. I look forward to meeting you." The response came quickly. "Likewise. This is all very confusing." Barbara almost smiled despite everything. Confusing was certainly one word for it. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in the king-sized bed she had shared with Matthew, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the man she had loved with the one who had deceived her so completely. The house creaked and settled around her, familiar sounds that now felt ominous. By dawn, Barbara had made a decision. She would meet Elena, assess the situation, and then determine her next steps. Jenny was right about needing her own lawyer, but first, she wanted to understand who this woman was and what she wanted. Elena Santos was driving north at that very moment, probably wondering what legal matter could involve a biological father she had never met. Barbara imagined her as a younger version of the woman in the photographs, dark-haired, kind-eyed, completely unaware that she was about to inherit a fortune. The Sullivan and Associates lobby buzzed with typical Tuesday morning energy when Barbara arrived at 9:45 a.m. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a navy blue blazer over dark jeans, professional but not intimidating. Her reflection in the elevator's polished steel doors showed a composed woman, though her stomach churned like she had swallowed live butterflies. Elena Santos was already waiting in the conference room when Sullivan escorted Barbara inside. She stood nervously by the windows, her back to the door, wearing a simple grey sweater and black pants that suggested a modest income. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low ponytail, and she turned as they entered. Barbara's breath caught. Eleanor looked remarkably like the woman in Matthew's hidden photographs, but there was something else, a familiar tilt to her chin, the way she held her shoulders. Matthew's genetic legacy was unmistakable. "Eleanor, this is Mrs. Barbara Morrison, your father's widow," Sullivan said with practiced diplomacy. Eleanor stepped forward, extending her hand. "I'm so sorry for your loss. This must be incredibly difficult." Her handshake was firm, her brown eyes direct but kind. Barbara detected no artifice, no calculation in her expression, only genuine sympathy and confusion. "Thank you," Barbara managed. "Please, call me Barbara." They sat across from each other at the polished conference table. Sullivan arranged his papers with deliberate ceremony, while Barbara studied Elena's face, searching for more traces of Matthew. The nose was different, smaller, more delicate, probably inherited from her mother. But the eyes, the way she pressed her lips together when thinking, were unmistakably his. "Elena, I know this situation is unusual," Sullivan began. "Your biological father, Matthew Morrison, passed away 2 weeks ago from pancreatic cancer. He recently learned of your existence and made provisions in his will." Elena shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate this, but I want you to know I'm not here for money. My mother only told me about my father because she's sick and wanted me to have some medical history. I don't expect anything from his estate." Barbara felt something unexpected, a stirring of respect for this young woman's integrity. Sullivan consulted his notes. "Nevertheless, Mr. Morrison has left you the majority of his estate, valued at approximately $12 million. Eleanor's face went white. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles standing out sharply. "I'm sorry, what?" "His business, investments, and most of his assets," Sullivan continued, as if he hadn't just turned someone's life upside down. "There are conditions and legal requirements, of course, but you are his primary beneficiary." "But—" Elena looked between Sullivan and Barbara, her composure cracking. "I never knew him. I never asked for anything. This isn't right." Barbara watched Elena's shock with growing surprise. This wasn't the reaction of someone who had orchestrated contact with a wealthy biological father. Elena genuinely seemed horrified by the inheritance. "I can't accept this," Elena said firmly. Barbara was his wife. She cared for him. This money should go to her. I'm afraid the will is legally binding, Sullivan replied. However, you would be free to make your own decisions about the inheritance once the estate is settled. Eleanor turned to Barbara, her eyes wide with distress. I had no idea about any of this. My mother never mentioned money. She just said my father was a businessman in Seattle and that I should know about him for medical reasons. How is your mother? Barbara asked softly. Eleanor's composure finally broke. Tears gathered in her eyes as she looked down at her hands. Not good. The cancer has spread. She might have weeks, maybe months. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry. This is just overwhelming. Barbara found herself reaching across the table, covering Elena's hand with her own. Don't apologize, this is a lot to process. Sullivan cleared his throat. Perhaps we should continue this conversation after you've both had time to absorb the information. Elena, you'll need to provide documentation proving your identity and paternity. DNA testing may be required. Of course, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Barbara made an impulsive decision. Eleanor, would you like to get some coffee? Away from all this. She gestured at the legal documents and formal atmosphere. Eleanor nodded gratefully. I'd like that very much. 20 minutes later, they sat in a small cafe in Capitol Hill, the urban energy of Seattle flowing around them. Eleanor cradled a latte with both hands as if seeking warmth, while Barbara stirred sugar into her Americano and tried to process the morning's revelations. Tell me about yourself, Barbara said. What do you do in Portland? I'm a social worker. I work with families in crisis, mostly helping kids navigate the foster system. Elena's voice grew stronger when discussing her work. It's not glamorous, but it's important. Barbara nodded. That's meaningful work. My mother raised me to believe in helping people who can't help themselves. She worked 2 jobs to put me through college. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears again. I can't believe she kept this secret all these years. Why do you think she finally told you? Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching steam rise from her latte. She said she didn't want me to wonder about my medical history if something happened to her, but now I think maybe she was hoping I could connect with him before it was too late. She looked up at Barbara. Did he know about me? Barbara chose her words carefully. Only recently. He wrote me a letter explaining everything. The affair, your mother's recent contact, his regret about the whole situation. What was he like? Elena asked quietly. The question pierced Barbara's heart. How could she describe Matthew, his ambition, his kindness, his secret-keeping, his final months of pain and vulnerability? He was complicated, Barbara said finally. Brilliant in business, generous with people he cared about, but not always good at confronting difficult truths. He loved you before he ever met you. Eleanor's tears fell freely now. I'm so angry at both of them. At him for not being there, at her for not telling me. But I'm also angry at myself for being angry at them. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Barbara assured her. You have every right to feel however you feel. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the late morning crowd. Students from the University of Washington, young professionals, artists carrying portfolios. Normal people living normal lives, unencumbered by life-changing secrets and unexpected inheritances. Barbara, Eleanor said finally, I meant what I said in there. I don't want this money. It should be yours. Barbara studied Elena's earnest face. What would you do if you kept it? Elena considered this. Pay off my student loans, I guess. Help my mother with her medical bills. Maybe start a foundation for kids aging out of foster care. She shook her head. But it feels wrong. Like I'm profiting from abandonment. You weren't abandoned, Barbara said gently. Your mother made a choice to protect you from a complicated situation. Were you happy with him? Eleanor asked suddenly. The question caught Barbara off guard. Yes. Despite everything, yes. He was a good husband, especially at the end. I just wish he had trusted me with the truth. Eleanor nodded slowly. My mother always said honesty was the foundation of everything important. I guess even good people sometimes fail at their own principles. As they prepared to leave, Barbara felt an unexpected kinship with this young woman. Eleanor's integrity and compassion reminded her of her younger self, before years of compromise and adaptation had worn away some of her idealism. Eleanor, Barbara said as they stood outside the cafe, would you like to see the house? Your father's house. There might be some things there that could help you understand him better. Eleanor hesitated. I don't want to intrude on your grief. You're not intruding. You're part of his story too. As they walked toward Barbara's car, Neither woman noticed the figure watching them from across the street. A man in a dark suit, taking photographs with a telephoto lens, capturing every moment of their meeting. The drive to Bellevue passed in comfortable silence, Elena gazing out at the changing landscape as they crossed the floating bridge over Lake Washington. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the water, and Mount Rainier loomed majestically in the distance, its snow-capped peak sharp against the October sky. "It's beautiful here," Elena said softly. "Different from Portland." Barbara nodded. Matthew chose this house because of the view. He said water calmed him after difficult days. As they turned into the circular driveway, Elena's intake of breath was audible. The Morrison mansion rose before them like something from a magazine, contemporary Pacific Northwest architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows, natural stone accents, and carefully manicured landscaping that suggested significant maintenance costs. "This is where you lived?" Elena asked, her voice small. "For 8 years." Barbara parked near the front entrance, noting how her voice had taken on the tone of a tour guide. "It's probably too much house for one person." Inside, Elena moved slowly through the spaces, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The living room's vaulted ceilings and massive stone fireplace created an impressive but somehow impersonal atmosphere, despite Barbara's attempts to add warmth through artwork and textiles. "He built this?" Elena asked, running her hand along the smooth granite countertop in the kitchen. "Had it built, yes. In 2015, right before we married." Barbara opened the refrigerator and pulled out 2 bottles of sparkling water. "He was very particular about the details. Every fixture, every finish had to be exactly right." Eleanor accepted the water but didn't drink. She seemed overwhelmed by the scale of luxury surrounding her. "I live in a studio apartment above a bakery. The whole thing would fit in this kitchen." Barbara watched Elena's face carefully. Still no greed, no calculation, only wonder tinged with discomfort. "Would you like to see his study? There might be some photos, some things that could help you understand who he was." Eleanor nodded, and Barbara led her down the hallway lined with Matthew's collection of Pacific Northwest photography. The study doors were heavy oak, and they opened to reveal Matthew's professional sanctuary, built-in bookshelves, a massive mahogany desk, certificates and awards covering one wall. Eleanor moved to the bookshelf, scanning the titles. Business strategy, leadership theory, some fiction. She pulled out a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "This was one of my favorite books in high school." "Mine too," Barbara said, surprised. "Matthew said it taught him about moral courage in business." Eleanor replaced the book carefully and continued her exploration. At the desk, she paused before a framed photograph Barbara had never paid much attention to. Matthew at a charity fundraiser, receiving an award for community service. He did charity work?" Elena asked. "Quite a bit. Youth mentorship programs, college scholarships for underprivileged kids. He never talked about it much, but I found the tax records after he died. He donated more than $1 million over the past 5 years." Elena's expression shifted, some internal calculation occurring. "To help kids. Mostly educational programs. He had very specific ideas about giving people opportunities to improve their circumstances." Barbara watched Elena absorb this information. The young woman seemed to be constructing a mental image of her biological father, piece by piece. "Barbara," Elena said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Why didn't you and Matthew have children?" The question hit an old wound. Barbara sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. "We tried for the first few years. Nothing happened. And the fertility treatments were—" She paused, remembering the monthly disappointments, the procedures, the gradual acceptance. "Eventually we decided we were complete as we were." Elena sat across from her. "Do you think he was thinking about me during that time?" Barbara considered the question honestly. "I don't know, maybe. He never gave any indication, but then again he was very good at compartmentalizing difficult emotions." Elena was quiet for a moment, then stood and moved to the window overlooking the backyard. "This is all so surreal. Yesterday I was worried about making rent and helping my mother pay for her medication. Today I'm sitting in a mansion worth more than I'll earn in my entire lifetime. How does that feel?" "Terrifying," Elena said immediately. "And wrong. Like I'm living someone else's life." Barbara joined her at the window. The October afternoon was fading, and the automatic sprinkler system had activated, sending arcs of water across the manicured lawn. "Eleanor, can I show you something else?" Barbara asked impulsively. "Something I found last night." She led Eleanor back to the bookshelf and retrieved the hidden photo album. Eleanor's hands trembled as Barbara showed her the pictures of her mother as a young woman. "She was so beautiful," Elena whispered, tracing her mother's face with one finger. "She still is, but the cancer has changed her so much." "You look like her," Barbara observed. Everyone always said that. Elena studied the sonogram image. "He kept these. Hidden but kept. I think they meant more to him than he could admit, even to himself." Elena closed the album carefully and handed it back to Barbara. "Keep it. I have plenty of pictures of my mother. These belong with his other memories." The gesture touched Barbara deeply. Eleanor could have claimed anything in this house, but she was giving back the only evidence of her father's secret love. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." Eleanor nodded. "Did your mother know about Matthew's wealth when she contacted him?" Eleanor's eyes widened. "Absolutely not. She found his name through old employment records from the coffee shop. She had no idea what he did for a living or what he was worth. She just wanted me to have medical information and maybe some closure about my paternity." Barbara believed her. Elena's surprise at the mansion, her discomfort with the inheritance, her immediate offer to refuse the money, none of it was performance. "What will you tell her?" Barbara asked. Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. She's so sick, and this money could pay for treatments, private care, maybe even some experimental therapies." Her voice cracked. "But she raised me to earn my own way. How do I explain accepting millions of dollars from a man we never knew?" "Maybe," Barbara said carefully, "you don't have to see it as charity. Maybe it's restitution for 30 years of support he should have provided." Eleanor considered this. "You really think he would have wanted to know me?" Barbara thought about Matthew's careful nature, his discomfort with emotional complexity, his genuine love for her despite his secrets. "I think he was terrified of disrupting the life he had built, but yes, I believe he would have wanted to know you. And I think you would have liked each other." As evening approached, Barbara offered to drive Elena back to her hotel, but Elena declined, saying she needed time to think. They exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch as the legal process moved forward. Standing in her doorway, watching Elena's modest Honda Civic disappear down the driveway, Barbara felt an unexpected sense of loss. For a few hours, the house had felt less empty, less haunted by Matthew's absence. Inside, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat in Matthew's study, looking at the hidden photographs. For the first time since his death, she felt angry rather than sad. Not angry at Elena, but at Matthew for his cowardice, at the situation that had robbed all three women, herself, Elena, and Maria, of authentic relationships built on truth rather than secrecy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Thank you for today. It helped me understand him better. And you too. I'm glad he had someone who loved him so much." Barbara stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm glad I met you." He would have been proud. Outside, darkness settled over the Bellevue Hills, and Barbara realized that for the first time in months, she was beginning to imagine a future beyond grief. 3 days later, Barbara's phone rang at 7 in the morning. Elena's name appeared on the screen, and Barbara could hear traffic noise in the background when she answered. "Barbara, I'm sorry to call so early. I'm driving back to Seattle. Something's happened." The urgency in Elena's voice made Barbara sit up straighter in bed. "What's wrong?" "My mother died last night." Barbara's heart clenched. "Oh, Eleanor, I'm so sorry." "It was peaceful," Eleanor said, her voice steady but strained. "She waited until I got back to Portland, and then she just let go. But Barbara, she left me a letter about Matthew, about everything." "Are you driving alone? You shouldn't be on the road alone right now." "I'm okay. I need to keep moving. Can I come see you when I get to Seattle? There are things I need to tell you about what my mother wrote." "Of course. Do you want me to pick you up somewhere?" "I'll come to the house if that's all right. I should be there in about 2 hours." After hanging up, Barbara made coffee and tried to prepare herself for whatever Elena had discovered. The young woman had sounded different, more determined, less uncertain. The death of her mother had apparently provided some clarity, along with grief. Eleanor arrived looking exhausted but resolute. She wore the same clothes from their previous meeting, now wrinkled from the long drive and what had probably been a sleepless night. She carried a manila envelope that she clutched like a lifeline. "I'm so sorry about your mother," Barbara said, embracing her. Eleanor felt fragile in her arms, all sharp angles and tension. "Thank you." She was ready. She told me she had stayed alive long enough to see me settled, and now she could rest. They sat in the living room, and Elena opened the envelope with hands that barely trembled. She wrote me 3 letters over the past few months. One for when she told me about Matthew, one for when she died, and one for if I ever met you. Elena handed Barbara 2 folded sheets of paper. This is the one about you. She wanted me to share it with you. Barbara unfolded the pages, noting the careful handwriting that had grown shakier toward the end. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this with Barbara Morrison, then God has been kinder than I dared hope. I prayed that you would find each other because you both need what the other can give. I have watched you your entire life struggle with questions about belonging, about family, about whether you were wanted. Barbara has spent 8 years wondering if she was enough for Matthew, if their childless marriage was somehow incomplete. You are both missing pieces of the same puzzle. I need to tell you the truth about Matthew and me. It wasn't just an affair, Elena. I loved him and he loved me. We talked about leaving our respective situations and building something together. But when Sarah gave him an ultimatum, either end things with me completely or lose everything he had worked for, he chose his established life. I was angry for many years. I raised you alone when I could have demanded his support. But I also made choices, Elena. I never told him I was pregnant because I was proud, and because I thought a reluctant father was worse than no father at all. Matthew never knew he was choosing money over his daughter. He thought he was choosing stability over chaos, responsibility over selfishness. I let him believe that because it was easier than fighting for what we both wanted, but were too afraid to claim. Barbara, if you are reading this, please know that Matthew's love for you was real and complete. You were not a consolation prize or a second choice. You were his peace after a storm he never fully understood. But Elena was his regret, his unfinished song. Help her understand that his absence wasn't abandonment. It was ignorance. Elena, you have your father's intelligence and moral compass, but you also have my stubbornness and my fear of depending on others. Barbara can teach you that accepting love and support isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And you can remind her that taking care of others doesn't require losing yourself. Take care of each other, your family now, in the way that matters most. All my love. Maria Santos. Barbara read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. Elena watched her silently, her own eyes red from crying. She loved him, Barbara said finally, for 30 years, even after everything. Elena's voice was thick with emotion. She never dated anyone seriously, because she said no one measured up to her memory of him. Barbara set the letter aside and looked at Elena with new understanding. And you've spent your whole life wondering if you were a mistake. Elena nodded. But now, I know I was wanted. Maybe not by him directly, because he never knew. But I was created out of love, not just carelessness. They sat in silence for several minutes, processing the revelation. Outside, a landscaping crew was working on the neighbor's yard, the sound of leaf blowers and lawnmowers, providing a mundane counterpoint to their emotional upheaval. Eleanor, Barbara said carefully, have you thought more about the inheritance? Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out another envelope. My mother's final letter addresses that too. She opened it and began reading aloud. Eleanor, you will be tempted to refuse your father's money out of pride or principle. Don't. This inheritance isn't charity or guilt payment. It's restitution for 30 years of support he would have provided if he had known about you. Use it to build the life you deserve, to help others as you've always wanted to do, and to honor the love that created you. Elena folded the letter and looked at Barbara. She also suggested I offer to share the inheritance with you, 50-50. Barbara was quiet for a long moment. What do you want to do? I want to do what's right. And I want to understand what my mother meant about us taking care of each other. Barbara stood and moved to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds that would soon belong to Eleanor. I've been thinking about this for 3 days. The truth is, I don't need $12 million. I have my own savings, my career to return to if I want. But you could use this money to change lives, your own and others. But you sacrificed years of your life caring for him. And those years taught me something important, Barbara said, turning back to Elena. Love isn't transactional. I didn't care for Matthew expecting payment. I did it because I loved him and because it was right. Elena stood and joined Barbara at the window. My mother was right about us, wasn't she? We do need each other. Barbara studied Elena's profile, so like Matthew's, but softer, more open. I think we could be good for each other. Yes, Barbara, I have a proposal. What if we use the inheritance to start something together? A foundation, maybe. For kids aging out of foster care, for families dealing with illness. We could honor both of them, Matthew and my mother. The idea sparked something in Barbara that had been dormant since giving up her museum career. You'd want to work together? If you'd be willing? I know about social work and community needs. You know about business and administration. And we both understand what it means to lose someone important. Barbara felt a smile tug at her lips for the first time in weeks. What would we call it? Elena grinned back. The Morrison Santos Foundation. Equal billing. I like it. Barbara extended her hand. Partners? Eleanor shook it firmly. Partners. As they discussed preliminary plans for the foundation, both women felt the weight of grief beginning to transform into something else. Purpose, hope, and the beginning of an unexpected family bond. Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street, or the man inside taking more photographs through tinted windows. The call came at 6 a.m. on a Thursday, jarring Barbara from the deepest sleep she'd had in weeks. The caller ID showed an unknown Seattle number. Mrs. Morrison, this is Detective Sarah Kim with the Seattle Police Department. I'm calling about some concerns regarding your husband's estate. Barbara sat up quickly, her heart rate spiking. What kind of concerns? Ma'am, I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Would you be available to come down to the precinct this morning? And you might want to bring an attorney. An hour later, Barbara sat in a sterile interview room across from Detective Kim, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s with kind but observant eyes. Barbara had called Elena, who was driving up from Portland after handling her mother's funeral arrangements, and attorney James Sullivan, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Mrs. Morrison, we've received some information suggesting that Ms. Elena Santos may have orchestrated contact with your husband specifically to gain access to his wealth, Detective Kim said without preamble. Barbara's stomach dropped. That's ridiculous. Elena didn't even know Matthew existed until 3 months ago. Detective Kim opened a manila folder. We have evidence that suggests otherwise. Photos, documentation, witness statements indicating that Ms. Santos has been researching your husband for over a year. She slid several photographs across the table. Barbara's breath caught. The images showed Elena outside Morrison Tech Consulting's office building, Elena at a Seattle coffee shop reading what appeared to be financial documents, Elena sitting in a car across from the Bellevue mansion. These were taken over the past 8 months, Detective Kim continued. We also have bank records showing that Ms. Santos received a significant cash deposit 3 weeks before she made contact with your husband. Sullivan leaned forward. Detective, who provided these photographs and allegations? An anonymous tip, but the evidence speaks for itself. Barbara stared at the photographs, her mind racing. The Elena in these images looked different, more calculating, more purposeful, but something felt wrong about the whole situation. Detective Kim, may I ask who initiated this investigation? Barbara asked. As I said, an anonymous tipster brought these concerns to our attention. Given the size of the estate involved, we felt compelled to investigate potential fraud. Barbara's phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Just arrived in Seattle. On my way to the station. Elena's coming, Barbara told Sullivan. She should hear these accusations directly. 20 minutes later, Elena entered the interview room looking confused and frightened. She wore a simple black dress from her mother's funeral, and her eyes were still puffy from crying. Detective Kim repeated the allegations while Eleanor's face grew pale. When shown the photographs, Eleanor studied them carefully. Detective, these photos are real, but they're not what they seem, Eleanor said finally. I can explain everything. I'm listening, Detective Kim replied. Eleanor took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I was assigned a case involving a teenager named Marcus who was aging out of foster care. He had a partial scholarship to the University of Washington, but needed additional support. During my research into local philanthropists who funded educational programs, I came across Matthew Morrison's name. She paused, gathering her composure. I spent weeks researching him, trying to figure out how to approach him for a donation for Marcus. I followed him, learned his routines, tried to work up the courage to make contact. Detective Kim remained skeptical. And you never made that connection to his relationship with your mother? I had no idea who my father was. My mother told me his first name was Matt, and that he worked in business, but that was all. Matthew Morrison was just a potential donor to me, nothing more. Barbara watched Elena's face carefully, searching for any sign of deception. Elena's story had the ring of truth, but the photographs were damning. "Elena," Barbara said quietly, "what about the bank deposit Detective Kim mentioned?" Elena's face flushed. "That was money I borrowed from my mother. She took out a personal loan against her house to help with Marcus's expenses while I was trying to secure larger funding. The timing was coincidental." Sullivan took notes rapidly. "Detective Kim, do you have any evidence that Ms. Santos actually approached Mr. Morrison before her mother made contact about paternity?" "The investigation is ongoing," Detective Kim replied evasively. Barbara's lawyer instincts, dormant since law school but still sharp, kicked in. "Detective, I'd like to know more about this anonymous tipster. Someone with access to this level of surveillance and financial information isn't just a concerned citizen." Before Detective Kim could respond, Eleanor spoke up. "There's something else you should know. Marcus, the teenager I was trying to help, he's been asking questions about what happened to his funding application. Someone called him yesterday claiming to represent Matthew Morrison's estate, asking detailed questions about his relationship with me." Barbara and Sullivan exchanged glances. The picture was becoming clearer, and it wasn't flattering to whoever was orchestrating this investigation. "Detective Kim," Barbara said firmly, "I want to see all the evidence you have. Financial records, witness statements, everything. And I want to know exactly when these allegations were made and by whom." Detective Kim hesitated. "Mrs. Morrison, I can't compromise an ongoing investigation." "There's no investigation to compromise if the allegations are fabricated," Sullivan interrupted. "My client has rights, and if someone is using the police department to harass the beneficiaries of an estate, that's a serious matter." Eleanor suddenly sat up straighter. "Wait. Detective Kim, can you tell me what kind of car I was supposedly driving in these surveillance photos?" Detective Kim consulted her notes. "A blue Honda Civic, license plate." "I don't own a blue Honda," Elena interrupted. "I drive a grey Toyota Camry that I bought used 3 years ago. The registration and insurance records will prove that." The room fell silent. Barbara felt a surge of vindication, while Detective Kim looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, gaining confidence, "these photos supposedly show me conducting surveillance over 8 months. But I can provide work schedules, timesheets, and case files proving I was in Portland during many of these dates, working with families in crisis." Sullivan was scribbling notes furiously. "Detective Kim, it appears someone has provided you with fabricated evidence. I strongly suggest you investigate the source of these allegations rather than the victims." Detective Kim closed her folder. "I'll need to verify Ms. Santos's claims, but given these inconsistencies, we'll be suspending this line of inquiry pending further investigation." After leaving the police station, Barbara, Eleanor, and Sullivan regrouped at a nearby cafe. Eleanor looked shaken but determined. "Someone really doesn't want me to inherit Matthew's money," Eleanor said. "The question is who?" Sullivan replied. "And how they got access to detailed financial information and professional quality surveillance equipment." Barbara had been thinking about this throughout the interview. "James, who else knew about the will's contents before Eleanor was contacted?" Sullivan considered carefully. "Very few people. Myself, my paralegal who prepared the documents, and the private investigator Matthew hired to locate Eleanor." "Private investigator?" Barbara and Eleanor said simultaneously. Sullivan looked surprised by their reaction. "Yes, Matthew hired Thomas Brennan to find Elena after her mother made contact. Brennan confirmed her identity and provided the address information we used to contact her." Barbara felt pieces clicking together. "James, I want you to investigate this Thomas Brennan immediately. Background, client list, everything." Elena nodded. "And I want to know who's been asking questions about Marcus and why they had detailed information about my work with him." As they prepared to leave, Barbara put her hand on Elena's shoulder. "I'm sorry you had to go through this, but Elena, your explanation about researching Matthew for Marcus's scholarship, that actually makes me feel better about your character, not worse." Eleanor managed a small smile. "My mother always said that helping one person well is better than helping 100 people poorly. I was just trying to help Marcus." "And now we're going to help you," Barbara said firmly. "Someone is trying to manipulate this situation, and we're going to find out who and why." As they walked to their cars, none of them noticed the black sedan following at a discreet distance, or the man inside making phone calls to report their movements. The game was escalating, and the players were finally beginning to understand they were in one. Barbara's investigation into Thomas Brennan yielded disturbing results within 48 hours. The private investigator had a history of working for divorce attorneys and insurance companies, specializing in what his website euphemistically called asset protection services. More troubling, his recent client list included several high-profile cases where inheritances had been successfully challenged. She shared her findings with Elena over coffee at the same Capitol Hill cafe where they had first talked honestly. Elena looked exhausted. The combined stress of her mother's death, the police investigation, and now this broader conspiracy was taking its toll. "So Brennan wasn't just finding me for Matthew," Elena said, stirring her untouched latte. "He was also gathering information that could be used to discredit me later. It looks that way. The question is whether he was working on someone else's instructions or planning his own scheme." Elena's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She glanced at the screen, then at Barbara. "Should I answer?" "Put it on speaker," Barbara suggested. Elena accepted the call. "Hello? Ms. Santos? This is Thomas Brennan. I believe we need to talk." Barbara's eyes widened. Elena gathered her composure quickly. "Mr. Brennan, I was just thinking about you. What can I do for you?" "I think the question is what I can do for you. There are people who don't want you to collect your inheritance, and they're playing a much more serious game than you realize." Elena and Barbara exchanged glances. "What kind of game?" Elena asked. "Meet me tonight at Pike Place Market by the fish-throwing stand. Come alone and don't tell anyone where you're going. Your phone conversations aren't private anymore." The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, then at Barbara. "You're not going alone," Barbara said immediately. "He specifically said, 'Elena, this man has been manipulating this entire situation. He could be trying to lure you somewhere dangerous.'" Elena considered this. "But what if he really has information we need? What if someone else hired him to discredit me, and now he wants to come clean?" Barbara studied Elena's face, noting the determination beneath the exhaustion. "Then we go together, but we tell James Sullivan where we're going and when to expect us back." That evening, Pike Place Market buzzed with its usual eclectic energy. Tourists photographed the fish-throwing vendors, street musicians performed for loose change, and the familiar aromas of coffee and fresh bread filled the air. Barbara and Elena positioned themselves near the fish stand, trying to blend in with the crowd while scanning for Thomas Brennan. A man in his 50s approached them, medium height, graying hair, wearing a navy windbreaker that made him look like any other Seattle tourist. He moved with the careful awareness of someone accustomed to watching and being watched. "Ms. Santos, I'm Thomas Brennan." He nodded to Barbara. "Mrs. Morrison, I expected you'd come along." "Mr. Brennan," Elena said, "what's this about?" Brennan gestured toward a quieter section of the market. "Walk with me. What I'm about to tell you will change how you see this entire situation." They moved away from the crowds, toward the market's edge where vendors were closing up for the evening. Brennan checked over his shoulder several times before speaking. "I was hired by Matthew Morrison to locate you, yes, but I was also hired by someone else to gather compromising information about you." Barbara's stomach tightened. "Who?" "Matthew's business partner, David Chen." Barbara's heart stopped. "David? That's impossible. David is—" "Your brother-in-law," Brennan finished. "Jenny Chen's husband, and he's been planning to contest Matthew's will from the moment he learned about Elena." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Barbara grabbed Elena's arm for support, her mind racing through implications. David had been Matthew's business partner for 15 years. He had been at Matthew's bedside during the final days. He had comforted Barbara at the funeral. "Why?" Barbara whispered. Brennan pulled out his phone and showed them several photographs. David Chen owns 30% of Morrison Tech Consulting. With Matthew dead and the business going to Elena, David loses control of the company he helped build. But if Elena is disqualified from inheriting, the business reverts to Matthew's secondary beneficiaries, which includes provisions for business partners. Elena stared at the photos, showing David meeting with various people, including Detective Kim. "He's been orchestrating everything. The surveillance photos were taken by his people, not mine. The anonymous tip to the police came from him. He's been building a case that you manipulated your way into the will through fraud." Barbara felt sick. "David's been in my house. He's been helping with funeral arrangements. She paused as another realization hit. "He's been asking detailed questions about you, Elena. About when you first contacted Matthew. About your financial situation." Brennan nodded grimly. "He's been very thorough." But he made one mistake. He assumed I'd be willing to fabricate evidence against Elena. When I refused, he found other people who were more flexible with the truth. Elena was quiet for a moment, processing everything. Mr. Brennan, why are you telling us this now? Because David Chen crossed a line when he involved the police with falsified evidence. That's not just unethical, it's criminal. And because... He paused, looking uncomfortable. Because I liked Matthew. He was a decent man who made some mistakes but tried to do right in the end. David is destroying his final wishes out of pure greed. Barbara pulled out her phone. I need to call James Sullivan, and then I need to call my sister. Mrs. Morrison, wait, Brennan said urgently. David doesn't know that I've contacted you. That gives us an advantage. If you confront him directly, he'll just deny everything and destroy evidence. Then what do you suggest? Elena asked. Brennan smiled for the first time since they'd met. I suggest we give him exactly what he thinks he wants and document everything. An hour later, they sat in Sullivan's law office, laying out a plan that felt both dangerous and necessary. Sullivan's initial shock at David Chen's involvement had given way to cold professional anger. This is going to require very careful coordination, Sullivan warned. If we make any mistakes, David could destroy evidence or flee. Barbara stared out the window at the Seattle skyline, lights twinkling in office buildings where people worked late, unaware of the drama unfolding in the law office below them. James, I need to know something. If Elena is disqualified from inheriting, what exactly happens to Matthew's estate? Sullivan consulted his notes. The business interests would be evaluated and distributed according to partnership agreements. David Chen would likely gain controlling interest in Morrison Tech. The personal assets and remaining investments would go to other named beneficiaries. Who are the other named beneficiaries? Elena asked quietly. Sullivan hesitated. You are, Mrs. Morrison. If Elena cannot inherit, you would receive the majority of the estate. The room fell silent as the full scope of David's manipulation became clear. He wasn't just trying to steal Elena's inheritance, he was trying to ensure Barbara inherited everything, knowing she would be easier to manipulate or convince to sell her interest in the business. He's been playing us against each other from the beginning, Barbara said slowly, making me feel guilty about Elena, making Elena feel guilty about taking my rightful inheritance, all while positioning himself to benefit either way. Elena stood and moved to the window. How do we stop him? Barbara looked at Eleanor's reflection in the glass, seeing her own determination reflected back. We make him think he's winning, and we document everything he does to try to steal what belongs to you. Brennan nodded approvingly. I can wear a wire to my next meeting with him. Get him to admit what he's been doing. It's dangerous, Sullivan warned. If David realizes what's happening, he could become desperate. Elena turned back to face them. It's worth the risk. My mother didn't keep her secret for 30 years just so some greedy business partner could steal what my father wanted me to have. Barbara felt a surge of admiration for Elena's courage. Then we do this, all of us together. 3 days later, Barbara sat in her kitchen trying to act normal while wearing a wire provided by Detective Kim, who had become an ally once she learned about David Chen's manipulation of the police investigation. Eleanor was positioned in the guest bedroom upstairs, monitoring the conversation through Sullivan's borrowed surveillance equipment. David was coming for dinner, a regular occurrence since Matthew's death that now felt sinister rather than supportive. Barbara had spent the morning preparing Matthew's favorite meal, Italian braised short ribs with polenta, partly for authenticity and partly to keep her hands busy. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. David Chen stood on the front steps holding a bottle of wine, his expression perfectly calibrated between sympathy and casual friendliness. At 52, he remained handsome in the way successful businessmen often were, well-groomed, confident, wearing his wealth in subtle details like his Swiss watch and Italian leather shoes. Barbara, you look better, he said, kissing her cheek. The color's coming back to your face. Thank you, David. Come in. Jenny couldn't make it. She's got the girls at soccer practice. You know how crazy weeknight activities get. They moved to the kitchen, where David opened the wine with practiced efficiency. Barbara accepted a glass, noting how normal everything felt, despite the recording device taped to her ribs. How are things with the will situation? David asked, his tone carefully casual. That whole police investigation must have been stressful. Barbara chose her words carefully. It was frightening. These allegations about Elena manipulating Matthew, I just can't believe anyone would think she's capable of that kind of deception. David's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Barbara, I know you want to think the best of her, but sometimes people aren't who they seem. Elena Santos appeared out of nowhere claiming to be Matthew's daughter, and suddenly she's inheriting millions. Don't you find that suspicious? David, the DNA test confirmed paternity. There's no question she's Matthew's daughter. DNA tests can be manipulated if you know the right people, and Elena's background, a social worker living paycheck to paycheck, suddenly researching wealthy philanthropists in Seattle, that's not coincidence. Barbara felt her heart rate spike but kept her voice steady. What do you mean researching wealthy philanthropists? David took a long sip of wine, seeming to weigh his words. I had some concerns about Elena's sudden appearance, so I hired someone to look into her background. Did you know she was conducting surveillance on Matthew for months before her mother supposedly made contact? That's not true, David. Elena explained about the teenager she was trying to help. Barbara, listen to yourself. She's feeding you a story designed to make her look sympathetic. Think about it. What are the odds that a social worker randomly researching donors would target the exact man who turns out to be her biological father? Barbara set down her wineglass with slightly trembling hands. David, how did you know about Elena's research into donors? That information wasn't in any police report. David paused, apparently realizing he had revealed too much. The private investigator I hired was very thorough. What private investigator? Barbara, I'm trying to protect you. Elena Santos is running a con and she's very good at it. But there are ways to challenge the will, especially if we can prove fraud. Barbara stood and moved to the stove, ostensibly to check dinner, but actually to put distance between them. David, Matthew wrote me a letter explaining about Elena. He knew she was his daughter. He wanted her to have the inheritance. Letters can be forged. Wills can be contested. Barbara, if Elena is disqualified, you would inherit everything. You deserve that money. You earned it through 8 years of marriage and 18 months of caregiving. There it was, the admission Barbara needed. David was actively working to overturn Matthew's will in her favor, knowing she would be easier to manipulate than Elena. But David, even if I inherited everything, I'd still want to share it with Elena. She's Matthew's daughter. David's facade began to crack. God damn it, Barbara, she's not some innocent victim. She's a grifter who researched Matthew, figured out his weaknesses, and manipulated her way into his will. And you're falling for it because you feel guilty about being childless. The words hit like a slap. Barbara turned to face him fully, noting the anger in his eyes that she had never seen before. That's a cruel thing to say. It's true. You've spent your whole marriage trying to fill some imaginary void, and now you think Elena can be the daughter you never had. But she's using your maternal instincts against you. Barbara felt tears prick her eyes, partly from hurt and partly from the realization of how calculating David had been throughout this entire process. David, what happens to Morrison Tech if Elena inherits? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What do you mean? You own 30% of the company. If Elena inherits Matthew's shares, she becomes your business partner. Is that what you're worried about? David's expression hardened. I built that company alongside Matthew for 15 years. I'm not going to let some stranger waltz in and destroy everything we worked for. So you hired people to fabricate evidence against her. I hired people to investigate her background and present the truth to authorities. If that evidence happens to disqualify her from inheriting, then justice is served. Barbara stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the man who had been manipulating her grief and guilt for weeks. David, you've been lying to me, to Jenny, to everyone. I've been protecting our family's interests. Barbara, Morrison Tech is worth $8 million. Do you want that controlled by some social worker from Portland, or do you want it managed by people who understand business? I want it to go to whoever Matthew intended to have it. David stood abruptly, his patience finally exhausted. Matthew was sick and sentimental when he wrote that will. He was manipulated by a woman who saw an opportunity and took it. But wills can be broken, Barbara, especially when there's evidence of fraud. What kind of evidence? David smiled coldly. The kind that shows Elena Santos has been planning this con for over a year. Bank records, surveillance footage, witness statements, enough to convince any judge that she's a fraud. Barbara felt a chill run down her spine. You fabricated evidence. I uncovered evidence. There's a difference. David, you need to leave. Barbara, don't do this. Elena Santos is not your friend. She's not Matthew's grieving daughter. She's a con artist, and she's very good at making people feel sorry for her. Get out of my house." David's expression shifted to something almost predatory. "Barbara, I've tried to do this the easy way, but if you insist on supporting Elena's claim, then you're part of the problem, and problems need to be solved." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check. This inheritance is going to be contested whether you support it or not, but your cooperation would make things much easier for everyone involved." Barbara moved toward the kitchen phone. "I think this conversation is over." David grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to hurt. "Barbara, you need to understand something. I've invested too much time and money in this situation to let it fail because you're feeling sentimental about some stranger." Barbara yanked her arm free and stepped back. "Don't touch me." "Then don't make me." "Elena Santos is going to be discredited and disqualified from inheriting. You can be supportive of that process, or you can be collateral damage. Choose wisely." David left without another word, slamming the front door behind him. Barbara stood in her kitchen shaking, partly from fear and partly from rage. Elena appeared from upstairs, her face pale but determined. "Did you get it all?" Barbara nodded. "Every word. Detective Kim is going to love the recording of him admitting to fabricating evidence." Barbara sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly exhausted. "Elena, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to hear him say those things about you, and I'm sorry my family has put you through this." Ilona sat across from her. "Barbara, David Chen is not your family. Your family is the people who care about you and support you, and right now, that includes me." Barbara looked up at Elena's earnest face and felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of guilt and grief that had been her constant companions for months. "Elena, when this is all over, I want you to know that I don't see you as a replacement for the children I never had. I see you as Matthew's daughter, and as someone I genuinely care about." Elena reached across the table and took Barbara's hand. "And I don't see you as an obstacle to my inheritance. I see you as the woman who loved my father when he needed it most, and as someone who's become important to me." Outside, David Chen sat in his BMW in the mansion's driveway, making phone calls to people who specialized in making problems disappear. He had underestimated both women, but it wasn't too late to correct that mistake. The game was entering its final phase, and David Chen had no intention of losing. The Seattle Police Department's conference room had been transformed into a command center for what Detective Kim called Operation Cleanup. Evidence covered multiple tables, photographs, financial records, recorded conversations, and testimony from witnesses who had finally come forward about David Chen's systematic fraud. Barbara sat beside Elena, both women flanked by their attorneys. Across the room, Thomas Brennan provided detailed testimony about David's attempts to fabricate evidence. Detective Kim coordinated with the district attorney's office, building a case that would ensure David faced serious criminal charges. "The recording from last night gives us everything we need," Detective Kim explained. "Admission of fabricating evidence, threats against witnesses, conspiracy to defraud an estate. David Chen is looking at multiple felonies." Eleanor squeezed Barbara's hand. "Is it really over?" "Almost," Sullivan replied. "We still need to formally present our findings to the probate court, but with this evidence, there's no question about the validity of your inheritance." Barbara's phone buzzed with a call from Jenny. She had been dreading this conversation since David's arrest early that morning. "I have to take this," she told the group, stepping into the hallway. "Barbara, what the hell is happening?" Jenny's voice was tight with stress. "David was arrested at 6 a.m. The girls were terrified. Police searched our house, seized his computers, his files, everything." Barbara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her sister's pain. "Jenny, I'm so sorry. I know this is devastating, but David has been trying to steal Elena's inheritance. He fabricated evidence, manipulated police investigations, threatened witnesses. That's impossible. David wouldn't—" "We have recordings, Jenny. His own admissions. He's been planning this since the day Matthew died." The line was quiet for a long moment. When Jenny spoke again, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable. "Barbara, I didn't know. I swear to you, I had no idea what he was doing." "I know you didn't. The house, the girls' college funds, everything is tied up in the business. If David goes to prison—" Barbara's heart broke for her sister. Jenny had always been the practical one, the planner, the one who made careful choices to ensure security for her family. Now she was facing financial ruin because of her husband's greed. "Jenny, come over tonight. Bring the girls. We'll figure this out together." "Barbara, I don't know if I can face Eleanor. If David really did these things to her." "Elena's not angry at you. She understands that David's actions aren't your responsibility." That evening, the Bellevue mansion felt more alive than it had in months. Jenny's twin daughters, Madison and Morgan, aged 12, explored the house with the resilient curiosity of children, while the adults sat in the living room confronting hard truths. Elena had insisted on cooking dinner, simple pasta with garlic and olive oil, that reminded Barbara of the comfort foods her own mother had prepared during difficult times. Jenny picked at her food, still processing the revelations about her husband's criminal behavior. "Elena, I owe you an apology," Jenny said finally. "David told me you were trying to take advantage of Barbara's grief. I believed him." Elena set down her fork. "Mrs. Chen, you had no reason to doubt your husband. And honestly, if I were in your position, I probably would have been suspicious too. Please call me Jenny, and thank you for being gracious about this. But David's actions have consequences. The business assets are frozen pending the investigation. The police seized his personal accounts. I don't know how I'm going to support my daughters." Barbara had been thinking about this all day. "Jenny, what if I told you there might be a solution that could help everyone?" Both women looked at her expectantly. "Eleanor and I have been talking about starting a foundation with the inheritance money. We need people with administrative experience, financial management skills, and a deep understanding of family crisis situations." Barbara paused, choosing her words carefully. "Jenny, you've managed David's business operations for years. You understand non-profits from your volunteer work. And you certainly understand what families go through when their security is threatened." Jenny's eyes widened. "Barbara, I can't accept charity from you." "It's not charity," Elena interjected. "It's a job offer. A real position with real responsibilities and real compensation." Barbara nodded. "The Morrison Santos Foundation is going to need an executive director, someone who can handle the administrative complexity of giving away millions of dollars responsibly." Jenny looked between them, tears gathering in her eyes. "You would do that, after what David did to both of you?" "Jenny, David's choices are his own. They don't define you or your daughters," Elena said firmly. "Besides, Barbara tells me you have a master's degree in public administration and 15 years of non-profit experience. That makes you exactly what we need." "And she was," Barbara added with a small smile. "Someone needs to keep Elena and me from spending all the money on emotional impulse projects. We need a practical voice in the room." Jenny laughed despite her tears. "That sounds like something I could do." Madison and Morgan chose that moment to wander into the dining room, curious about the adult conversation. At 12, they were old enough to understand that their father was in serious trouble, but young enough to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. "Mom, are we going to live here now?" Madison asked, having overheard parts of the conversation. "No, sweetheart. We have our own house, but Barbara and Elena are going to help us get through this difficult time." "Is Dad really a bad guy?" Morgan asked with the blunt directness of childhood. Jenny struggled for an answer, but Elena spoke first. "Your dad made some very bad choices that hurt people. That doesn't make him entirely bad, but it does mean he has to face consequences for what he did." The girls seemed to accept this explanation. They had always been perceptive children, and Barbara suspected they had sensed tension in their household long before David's arrest. Later, after Jenny and the girls had gone home, Barbara and Elena sat in Matthew's study, finalizing plans for the foundation. The hidden photograph album lay open on the desk between them, no longer a source of pain, but a reminder of the complex circumstances that had brought them together. "Barbara, can I ask you something?" Eleanor said, looking up from the legal documents they were reviewing. "Of course. Do you think Matthew would approve of what we're doing? The foundation, helping Jenny, all of it?" Barbara considered the question seriously. "I think Matthew would be amazed that his mistakes led to something positive. He always believed in second chances and practical solutions to human problems." Elena nodded. "My mother would have liked you, you know. She always said the best people were the ones who could find hope in difficult situations. And Matthew would have been proud of you," Barbara replied. "You have his sense of justice and his determination to help people, but you also have your mother's compassion and emotional intelligence." Eleanor closed the legal folder and looked around the study. "What happens to this house? I know Matthew left it to me, but it feels wrong to take your home." Barbara had been thinking about this question for days. Eleanor, this house was Matthew's dream, not mine. I'd like to keep living here for now if you're willing, but eventually I think I'd prefer something smaller, more personal. What if we turned it into the Foundation's headquarters? There's plenty of space for offices, meeting rooms, maybe even temporary housing for families in crisis. The suggestion sparked something in Barbara's imagination. The Morrison-Santos house, a place where families can get practical support and emotional healing. Exactly. We could have counseling services, financial planning assistance, educational support, a comprehensive approach to helping people rebuild their lives. Barbara looked around the study with new eyes, imagining it transformed from Matthew's private sanctuary into a space for healing and hope. He would love that, using his success to give other people the opportunities he almost missed with you. 3 months later, the Morrison-Santos Foundation officially opened its doors in the renovated Bellevue mansion. The formal living room had become a comfortable counseling center. Matthew's study housed the administrative offices. The guest bedrooms provided temporary housing for families in transition. Elena had moved to Seattle permanently, taking over a social work position with King County while also serving as the Foundation's program director. Jenny managed the Foundation's operations with the efficiency Barbara had predicted, her daughters thriving in their new school district and finding stability despite their father's imprisonment. Barbara had returned to her museum work part-time, curating exhibitions that highlighted social justice themes while also serving as the Foundation's board chair. The guilt and grief that had consumed her since Matthew's death had transformed into purposeful action. David Chen pleaded guilty to multiple charges of fraud and conspiracy, receiving a 5-year sentence that would give his family time to rebuild their lives without his manipulative influence. The business assets were liquidated to pay restitution and legal fees, but the Foundation's resources ensured Jenny and her daughters faced no immediate financial hardship. On the anniversary of Matthew's death, Barbara and Elena visited his grave together, carrying flowers from the mansion's garden. The October morning was crisp and clear, Mount Rainier visible in the distance like a gentle giant watching over the city. "Do you think he knows?" Elena asked, arranging the bouquet near the headstone. "I think he knows that his mistakes led to something beautiful," Barbara replied. 3 women who barely knew each other a year ago are now family. That's not a small thing. Eleanor stood and brushed dirt from her hands. "No, it's not small at all." As they walked back to the car, Barbara reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. She had begun the year as a grieving widow, convinced her future held only loneliness and regret. Instead, she had gained a daughter of choice, a renewed sense of purpose and the understanding that family could be created through choice and commitment, rather than just blood and marriage. "Eleanor," she said as they reached the parking area, "I have something for you." Barbara pulled a small wrapped package from her purse. Inside was a simple silver locket containing 2 photographs, Matthew at his happiest and Maria Santos as a young woman. "I thought you should have something that represents both of them," Barbara explained. Elena's eyes filled with tears as she fastened the locket around her neck. "Thank you. For this, for everything, for becoming my family when I needed one most." Barbara embraced her, feeling the truth of those words settle into her heart. Sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as losses, and sometimes the families people needed most were the ones they chose, rather than the ones they were born into. The Morrison-Santos Foundation would go on to help thousands of families navigate crisis and rebuild their lives. But for Barbara and Elena, its greatest success would always be the unexpected bond forged between 2 women who had lost everything they thought they wanted, only to discover what they actually needed had been waiting for them all along. In the end, Matthew's final gift wasn't the money or the property or the business assets. It was the chance for 2 remarkable women to find each other and create something beautiful from the ashes of deception and loss. The truth had indeed arrived on cue, but it brought with it something neither Barbara nor Elena had expected. The beginning of a new kind of family, built on choice, commitment, and the understanding that love multiplies when it's shared rather than hoarded. As they drove back to the Foundation house, past the familiar Seattle skyline, and toward the work that gave their lives meaning, both women knew that Matthew's greatest legacy wasn't what he had left behind, but what he had made possible for those who came after.